Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I thought I'd bring you along and show you how I make one of my journals. This is not a tutorial because there are already tons of great ones out there. This is more of a look at how I think my way through a project and some of the choices I make along the way. I did record most of this footage back in the summer. I had already sewn the signatures onto a piece of fabric to create the signature block. So that is what you see here. And it has 3 signatures. I've made journals with a theme, such as gardening or photography, but have also done many with no theme at all. Currently, the journals I'm making have a grungy look to them, so that's the style I do try to achieve. Ink stained, torn pages and such. Perhaps it's a cover design that helps with the feel of a journal, and one of the most common questions is, do I make the cover first or the signatures first? And the answer is, it really depends on the project. If I have a cover idea that I'm excited about, like a favorite fabric, photo or a graphic, image, or a combination of those, I'll start there and let everything else follow. Other times, I just start by gathering papers and building the signatures, and that ends up inspiring the cover. For example, I made this cover first. It's an image of a flower inside a frame, layered on top of some grungy cardboard and tulle, and then everything is glued onto bookboard. It really doesn't matter the order, but what I will say is that if you want the pages to fit inside of the cover, keep that in mind. I'm going to grab a finished journal here to show you. So I'm okay with the pages hanging outside of the cover, but if you don't want that look, you'll want to make sure that the pages are trimmed to fit inside the cover, or the cover is slightly larger than the pages. When I do start with the pages, I think about variety, and I like to use different weights of paper and anything that adds interest. Many of the papers I have distressed with ink or paint, and I do have a couple of videos showing this process, and I'll link those videos below. I use a lot of these distressed papers like brown paper bag, file folders, scrapbook paper, and I also use a lot of printed images, some that I've made and some that I've purchased. I choose my papers, cut or tear them to the size I want, and fold them in half. Some of them will fit inside of the covers, and some I like to have hang slightly outside of the covers, just for interest. I save all the scraps after tearing and cutting the pages, and use them later as I decorate and add to the journal. I also consider how the journal will be used. I like to think that it could be used for many different purposes, maybe just for writing in, or it may become someone's art journal. I like to leave spaces for writing and or for artwork, so I'll leave quite a few pages undecorated or use lightly patterned paper. So here's an example of I've used 3 pieces of scrap paper to create pockets. I've just attached them by stitching down both sides and then placing that piece down on the page and gluing the sides and the bottom to create those pockets. I like to take my time to finalize the layout of the pages and the order of the signatures. I move pages around until I'm happy and it all just feels right. The steps don't always happen in the same order. However, there are a few things to keep in mind. If you, for instance, were planning on doing any machine stitching directly onto the pages, you may want to do that before sewing the signatures and putting the covers on. It just makes it a lot easier. Once I'm happy with everything, the pages, the cover, the overall feel, I finally bind it together, which in this case, I've already done that. As you can see, I've sewn the signatures onto the fabric. And then the next thing I'm going to do is add the covers. Now, before I put the covers on, I just wanted to let you know that the fabric that I've stitched the signatures onto is actually 2 layers. And in between those 2 layers, I've added a bit of it. This is just drywall tape. So I've put that in between the 2 pieces of fabric, and then I've stitched around the edges. I just find it gives it a little extra oomph, a little extra texture to it. So that is how I build that piece of fabric and then sew the signatures in. So here I am just placing the covers on to have a look at where I'm going to want to glue them in place. So I've decided that I want to cover that back cover with something. So I'm just looking through my papers and trying to decide what I'd like on the back of it. And I decide to go with this paper. So I'm going to add some glue. I've had great results using art glitter glue for both paper and fabric. So that's what I'm using here, and I'm also going to use it to adhere the covers when we get there. So here I'm just using an old gift card to smooth that glue out, adding the paper, just getting rid of any of the glue that squishes out around the edges. I've cleaned my gift card off and I'm just burnishing that paper down. And once I've done that, I'll just trim off the edges. And once that glue dried, I took a sanding block and just sanded down the edges of that cover. And then I distressed the edges of the cover with some ink. And to give it a little extra protection, I took it outside and I gave it a spray of clear matte acrylic coat. It doesn't make it completely waterproof, but it does add a layer of protection. And this is the can that I used. Okay, so I'm going to attach the front cover. So here I'm applying a generous amount of glue to the fabric, just where I want to lay down that front cover and adhere it. So this is on the outside of that piece of fabric. And then I'm just going to lay the cover on top of that and press down lightly so that I don't have too much glue squish out, because I have used a generous amount there. And I just open it up and do the same inside. You can see that fabric is, and just make sure it's lined up and fairly even. It doesn't have to be perfect. My journals really aren't perfect. So I'm just pressing that down, making sure that it's made contact, and just wiping away any excess glue that squirts out from the sides. Making sure it's more or less centered on the front of that journal. And then I'm just going to lay a heavy book on top of that and let it dry. Okay, and now I'm going to attach the back cover. So I just lay it down and get an idea of how it's going to look and where I'm going to be placing it. And as with the front cover, I apply the glue to the outside of that fabric. I don't put it, I put it up close to the edge, but on the other side, closer to the stitching, I leave a little bit of a gap there. I can always add some glue in there later if I need to. So again, a generous amount of art glitter glue. I lay that back cover down. Just wipe up any glue that squishes out. And I'm just having a look to make sure I've got the front and back cover more or less lined up, fairly even to the spine and the stitching. Give it a light but firm press. I'm going to open up that back page and just press it down from the inside as well. And make sure that it's all pressed down and the glue is touching both the fabric and the book board, the cover. And then I'm going to lay that heavy book on top and let that dry. Now I'm going to choose some papers for the inside of the front cover and the inside of the back cover. So I'm just looking at some options here. So for the inside of the back cover, I'm going with this piece of ink dyed brown paper bag. So I'm just making a kind of a straight edge with that. And I'm going to glue that in. When I'm doing covers, I usually use a little extra glue, so it does look like a lot. Normally, with art glitter glue, you don't need very much, but with covers, I do like to add a little extra. So I'm just laying that down, making sure that it's pressed down really well, and then I'm going to lay that big book on top and let it dry. And once it's dry, I'm going to just cut away the extra paper from the edges. I give it a little light sanding and some distress ink. And then I want to put a pocket on that back page, that inside cover. So I choose a printed piece of paper, give it some distress ink on the edges, and I just glue that down on 3 sides so that it leaves an opening on the left-hand side for a pocket. Again, a little bit of glue, and I just lay that down. Make sure it's secure. Okay, so now for the inside of the front cover. And I'm looking again at a few different options. Some of the pieces aren't big enough, but I could use multiple pieces if I wanted to, and in this case that's what I'm doing. I'm just using a piece of inked brown paper bag and another printed piece. It's torn on the edges, so I'm giving it some ink around the edges to distress it. I'm sorry I'm out of camera. It looks like I'm almost out of shot there, but there, I've decided on my pieces. I'm heading off to the sewing machine to just stitch those together. As you can see, that's going to form a nice little pocket. And then I'm going to glue that to the inside of the front cover. Placing that down and making sure it's, more or less in the right spot, up against the edges. And once that's all pressed down, I will bring out that book again and lay it on top and let everything dry. Okay, so that's dry, and this journal is more or less finished. Now I might want to add a few more things inside, but at the moment it is very close to being complete. And that's basically my process, a good portion of it anyways. There are so many different methods for making and binding a journal. This journal has an exposed spine, for instance. You can see the fabric and the thread where the signatures were sewn onto the fabric. But that could be covered before gluing the covers on. You could use perhaps lace or printed fabric. There really are so many options. There's no one process fits all. It does take some practice, and mistakes will be made. I have certainly made many, but that's how we learn, right? And it's not always about doing the steps in any particular order. It's about letting the project evolve as you create it. I do have a flip through video of this journal. I'll link that video below. And I hope you enjoyed this behind the scenes look at how I make my journals. I thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.